Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Neuroqueering podcast. I'm your host, Pasha Marlowe. And today, our guest is Jennifer Berlingo. And Jen is a midlife coach and an art therapist for the past 20 years and wrote the brilliant book, Midlife Emergence. And I'm really excited to have you here. Jen, welcome.
Thanks. Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, first of all, midlife emergence. I'm just excited. Like emerge, that already is such a beautiful, juicy word.
It is.
Why did you choose emergence?
Well, for me, like the term midlife crisis just didn't feel like applicable because it is historically centered the male experience of midlife. Psychologically, midlife's like 40 to 65 years old or so. And when I entered my 40s, I really felt like this idea of emergence was more fitting because that word means the process of coming into view or becoming exposed after being previously concealed. Which is
Mm,
kind of what it felt like was this like shedding or molting of all of these like social, familial, cultural conditioning layers that were put upon me and a lot of us. And then just really getting down to what's more authentic and aligned internally. So it felt like bringing a lot of that forward with more visibility was what the developmental challenge at this time of life felt like. And I see that reflected in the people I work with as well. And just it's this opportunity really to like reauthor the second act of life in a way that might feel more congruent with the insides. So that's where
beautiful.
that came from. Thanks.
I'm already seeing the synergies because in the world of neurodiversity, unmasking is a term that
Hmm.
we use often, and it feels like that like unmasking and kind of unraveling the truth of who we are. And I love
Yeah,
the emerging as well. And of course, it brings up these images of a caterpillar morphing into a butterfly and
of
emerging
course.
whole new being.
Yeah,
So I imagine you have your own emergence story of your own emerging.
I do. I do. Yeah. Do you want me to tell a little bit
Yes,
about it?
please,
Sure.
please.
Um, yeah, like I said, when I hit 40, there was this like inkling that I wanted more. I had a really on paper beautiful life, married to a wonderful man who was my best friend. We have an amazing kid. I had my private psychotherapy practice. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time, and that was thriving and going. And it's like, is this all there is? Like, I want more. And then that guilt and shame for wanting more when there's something that feels
Mhm.
actually right and fine, right?
Fine.
And I also hear that from a lot of people at this age, and it really feels like in the early 40s that when those like whisperings or sometimes shouting from within starts to happen for a lot of people, where it's like, uh, yeah, I want more truth, grit, depth, honesty, rawness, passion, whatever that is. And so that was brewing inside of me quite a bit. And I had known my whole life that I was queer. I That's actually one of the first conversations I had with the man who became my husband, Craig. And I was like, I had just moved to New York City. I met him. I'm like, I'm looking for a girlfriend. Like, I'm done with this guy.
Mhm.
We started becoming friends, and 3 years later we were engaged. 4 years later we were married. So it was like, yeah, I fell in love with him, and that was that for a while. And it really wasn't so much of an issue until it got louder inside of me. And I really realized like I need to have this experience in my life to actually feel this part of myself be more visible. The invisibility of it was feeling a little bit toxic, like to be in a um, like heteronormative presenting relationship and know that I was queer and, feeling like I was having to come out over and over again. I still have to come out over and over again, especially with just the queer femme invisibility piece, like being quite femme
Yes.
presenting.
Yes.
Um, and we decided, I was very open with him about all of this, and we decided to try to open our marriage and see if
Mhm.
that might be a way to explore this. And so we went really slowly with that. We read all the books. We worked with a therapist who specializes in ethical non-monogamy. Um, tiptoed into it over the course of a few years, really, the unfolding of that. And I talk about that in my book.
Mhm.
And then eventually I started dating a woman who I'm still dating. And it's been almost 4 years. And
Wow.
yeah, and it really became clear that, especially like with my attachment style and his, and what we
Mm.
wanted marriage to look like, we were like, this just needs to take a new shape. And we
Mhm.
separated and divorced in a way that I feel like upheld the vows that we
Mm.
took, which were to let each other be the most free and
Right.
expansive versions of ourselves possible, and to help each other do that. And I wanted to free him of that and to be able to have
Yes.
the type of marriage and sexual relationship that he wanted. And I wanted to be free to do that as well. So we're still best friends. We live down the street from one another. We co-parent our 16-year-old. But yeah, we've been divorced for a while. So there's both like joy and elation and total grief still in that at the same time coexisting. Yeah,
Yes. Because even though it sounds like it turned out just about as well as could ever be, there's
yeah,
still that grief. And do you call it the messy middle, the like that transition where you're like, oh,
yeah,
am I
definitely.
winning?
That my whole
Yeah.
40s have been quite messy, and I'll be 48 in December, so it's been a little while, and it feels like that's the part I really feel like I want to stand for. And part of the reason I wrote the book was to have that mess be visible as well. Because I feel
Yes.
like a lot of times, especially in social media, we feel like we have to present and have everything together. And, this is why I did this and this followed, and led to this part of life. And really, it's not linear and it's not
No.
neat. And emotions are messy. And I really felt like we need to be talking about those things more. As women and just as humans, really, and sharing that part with each other, those vulnerable parts, because it helps to
Absolutely.
validate other people to hear that and invite them to share their own piece and live into that more. Um,
Absolutely. And when you
yeah.
started to open up your marriage and explore ethical non-monogamy, had you not met your current girlfriend and not had a catalyst, I guess, relationship there, do you think you would have remained married? Do you think being queer in and of itself would have become a reason to individuate?
Um, I think, yeah, I actually, we were probably on the path to separation, divorce, whether or not I had met my girlfriend.
Mhm.
And there was another, actually one of my best friends I have been close to forever that I was attracted to. And that actually was more of a catalyst situation than
Okay.
my current girlfriend. Even though nothing transpired there romantically, it was something that, I discussed with her, and our friendship held, and we're still best friends. And I write about that part in the book as well. But with that piece, it felt really um, obvious to me that
Hmm.
this is where all of my like sexual, sensual, eros sort of energy was flowing, was more in
Yeah.
that direction, and always had been. Truly, like all of my fantasies my whole life have been about women. Like, the Barbie movie out, it's kind of funny, like all my Barbies were, with each other. The Ken dolls were like face down in a pile of clothes somewhere else. I think I only had two of them. I had like 30, Barbies, and they were always making out.
That's
And
great.
yeah, like it's always been in me in that way. I just didn't like growing up in the Southeast, in the 70s, 80s. I had no frame of reference for what queer relationships were or would look like other than like slurs I'd heard, right? So I didn't have any models for like what that could even be or if that was possible. So I dated boys and I dated men eventually, and
Right. Right.
um, did that whole, compulsory heterosexuality thing until I couldn't anymore. And
Hmm.
so, yeah,
Hmm.
I think that, yeah, it wasn't the relationship with my current girlfriend that,
Okay.
yeah, ended my marriage, but just I think the thing being so loud inside of me that needed to be expressed.
And I always come back to, I think it was a Glennon Doyle quote, there's no one way liberation, although I don't know if she
Yes.
originated the quote. But did you find that other people in your life, friends or family, also liberated themselves in their truth after you not only came out, but separated and moved on with your girlfriend? I would just wonder if it had a ripple effect.
Yeah, I think that I'm seeing that happening more now too. That now that my book is in the world, it was published in
Mm.
April 2023, and and yeah, truly it was, more in my more immediate concentric circles first, obviously, but that's a complicated thing. I think for the closest people, like my family of origin, my mom, my sister, like I, I feel like it's a little uncomfortable at first, especially given the cultural and familial conditioning there, where it's like, and with good friends, sometimes they hold you to a way of being or an expectation. This is who you've always been to me. You've been this person for 20 years or 40 years or however long I've been in their life. Um, are you sure? I'm worried about you. Everything seems great on paper. Like what? So
Mhm.
that in itself, like fielding the expectations and the projections was the initial feeling there. And then I started seeing the rippling out of like, my truth telling really inspiring others to do the same. So actually, this is the way my book came about. I started sharing in early 2020 on Instagram little snippets. I was doing something called the 100-day project and painting like a rainbow every day and writing a little piece of like what was emerging in me. And I called the project 100 Days of Midlife Emergence, not knowing there was a book coming or
Oh,
anything,
wow.
but coined the term. And I started to share that. And I got so many comments and DMs from people, strangers, and people that like I hadn't talked to since high school or something, who are like, oh my gosh, me too. Let me tell you this part of my story, whether it was about sexuality or other pieces like that were just emerging in them in midlife that were, could be around career, or I've always wanted to move to this other country, or around parenting, or, what their passions were, what things that they wanted to follow. And a lot of it was around sexuality and marriage and opening marriages. Like a lot of people came out as poly, to me, like, no one knows this, but blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And like, it was very cool to see that rippling out and having
Mm.
people have a place to share that. And that's really why I wrote it in a book. A few of the comments were like, this should be a book. And I was like, huh, I
Hmm.
wanted to write a book since I was 3. Like this may be the book. So yeah, I ended up writing, it's part memoir, part personal growth. So it tells, my story of emergence, but also in the 13 chapters, there are 13 kind of non-linear midlife themes that I've identified. And at the end of each chapter, there are um, invitations for the reader to do their own journaling, art, and personal ritual and ceremony type of things to explore that theme in their own midlife journey.
I love
And
that.
woven in with like, my art therapy and Reiki,
Yes.
the different work that I've done in there. So yeah, it's kind of both. And it really has, yeah, I've definitely been seeing more of the ripple as people read the book and, reach out or write a review. Um, and the people in my life as well. So I think that we never know where those ripples go or how many people we're impacting, and how many people those people are impacting. It's like so
Exactly.
exponential that it's exciting to me to
It is
just,
so.
yeah,
Yeah, my DMs are so beautiful. I mean, and of course they're private and confidential, so I can't share them,
yeah,
but the amount of DMs I get in a day just saying, I just saw that film about you. I just read the book. I just heard the podcast, and I thought you were telling my story. Like it's like you're in my head. And
yes,
I've never told anybody this, blank, 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 and there's so much revealing and healing that happens. It's beautiful, and it's such an honor to be a witness to it and participate in those journeys. And I think in I found the same in my coming out queer, but then also more recently coming out neurodivergent. There's so many parallels there that
right,
that too has liberated people to depathologize and de-shame their way of not just thinking but being and moving and living through the lens of neurodivergence. And now
yes,
I'm starting to see so many correlations that I believe I see my sexuality and gender through the lens of my neurodivergence and see my
mhm.
neurodivergence through the lens of my sexuality and gender. And I'm wondering if you've experienced something similar.
Yeah, it's such an interesting and kind of new exploration for me. It's so funny, like books are such a static, snapshot in time. And I wrote most of my book in 2020. And at the time when
Hmm.
I wrote in the introduction, like I'm a white, cisgender, neurotypical, upper middle class person. And, I have these privileges I did nothing to earn, the system's broken, whatever. And since then, a lot has changed and broadened, I think, in the way that we define neurodiversity. And it's such a huge topic, in pop psychology and the things we see on social media and like with my teenager and their friends. And, it's so different than my parents' generation when mental health, diagnoses were shame laden. And I'm just so grateful that it's not, that those definitions are broadening. So it was a few months ago, I guess, maybe just a couple months ago, I listened to Catherine May speak on Glennon Doyle's We Can Do Hard Things podcast.
Mm.
I don't know if you heard that episode, but she's the author who wrote Wintering and Enchanted. But she was on the episode talking about a book she had written before those called The Electricity of Every Living Thing. And
Yes.
yeah, have you read that?
I haven't. It's on my list.
Yeah, it's on actually, I just started it last week, so I'm not very far in, but what she was talking about on the podcast was, about how she feels the electricity and, like, the energy of most beings, and that's something I've been able to do since I was a child, and I've always felt, like, weird about it because it wasn't really reflected back to me anywhere as a kid, and very little as an adult, and, I'm often told I'm, like, too sensitive, so I've always considered myself, like, hypersensitive and a highly sensitive person, but hearing Catherine May describe this like cluster of traits that she experiences, and those resulted for her in an adult autism diagnosis for herself more recently in her life.
Yes.
And the, misconceptions about that diagnosis and the really outdated ways that it's tested. So I was starting to learn a bit about that. And yeah, for example, like she talked about how she sees a spectrum of like a rainbow every time there's an overhead projector in a room, or how someone's
Mm.
perfume can like offend her soul, or
Yes. That makes so
how
much
when she's,
sense.
yeah, right. And a lot of that for me, like she's talking about how overwhelming sound can be and how overwhelming like early motherhood was. And as I'm listening to this podcast, I'm like, I relate to every word of this. So,
Mhm.
I started to read her book, but yeah, like I can't be around over like LED lights. Like when I see them flickering red, blue the entire time. And most of the people around me don't see that.
Right.
I
I
do,
hear the lights. I think you can
I do
hear
too.
electricity. Mhm.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wrote in my book about like how I cry at the smell of rain or the sound of fireworks, or I'm too sensitive to like touch, sound, scent. And early motherhood was harder for me in a sensory way than a lot of mothers I was close to.
Mm.
So I always felt like some guilt about the overwhelm of
Mm.
that. Um,
Mhm.
but I think that my sensitivities have pointed me in a direction where I've tried to use them even unconsciously. They've like led me to this vocational path that I'm in, doing the work that I do in the world, because it's not like that acceptable in a lot of social circles to be that sensitive. Um, in most like patriarchal systems, at least.
Right.
So, yeah, like that. There, the message is just to like power through, and that's never worked for me. So,
No.
anyway, all that to say, like, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm learning that I might have some neurodivergent things going on. I have no idea what my diagnosis would be, or if, that is something that is on the spectrum of autism. And I don't even know if it's like necessary for me personally to receive a diagnosis, but I do know that it's helpful for me to read and hear those things and feel validated in that. And in
Yes.
the way that a lot of people feel very validated with different diagnoses and relieved by them. So
Uh,
that's where
uh,
I am with it. I'm
I,
exploring it.
yeah, I have so many thoughts. One is I've come to realize that my personal belief now is that highly sensitive person is just an ableist term for autism. In fact, the person who coined that term, uh, when I can't remember her name, but when she was writing about the family members who are highly sensitive, they have since been diagnosed as autistic. So I feel like
Yeah.
and I know there's a lot of controversy in there, but that's just my personal belief because the comparisons and the synergies are just too immense. Um,
Right.
but then also from this lens of being a highly sensitive person or an unmasked autistic woman, and then having this idea of neuronormativity, which I don't even feel like I could separate from my ideas of heteronormativity. In fact, even just when I think about neuronormativity and what the world believes is neuronormative, also mimics heteronormativity.
Yeah.
Then you start unraveling patriarchy
Patriarchy. I was about
and
to say.
capitalism and white
Yeah.
supremacy and ableism, and I always come back to the, the when you give a mouse a cookie book.
Give a mouse a cookie. Yeah, I loved that book when my
I
kid was young.
I they have a many spin-offs. The one I ended up finding the
Yeah.
most recently was if you give a pig a pancake. But I'm like reading this, I'm like,
Mhm.
first of all, this is all about ADHD. But then I also start thinking, oh, it's also about neuroqueering, and it's also about
Yes.
unraveling these systems of oppression and intersectionality. And I'm like, am I reading too much into this children's book about a pig and a pancake? But it's like, this is such a great analogy. But yeah,
I
I think
love
this
that.
this midlife emergence feels like that, because once we
Yeah,
start unraveling and emerging one part of ourselves, then we start questioning and queering and diverging from many norms.
totally.
And that's such a it's a beautiful emergence, and it's also a little unsettling because you're like, what? Everything I've been taught is wrong or not true, and whose rules have I been living by, and what game have I been playing, and what else isn't true. And then it feels a
Yes.
little fragile for a while,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's something I hear a lot and feel personally a lot. Like most of my clients are what, I and they would call like recovering good girls or recovering people pleasers
Yes.
kind of thing, where it's like they've done all the things that they should have wanted to do or should have done, all the
Should have
shoulds,
won.
you know, um, like high school, college, met the man, like bought the house, had the kid, like all of the things, right? And it's still empty and it's like filling these roles that didn't necessarily emerge from inside of them. Um and like the psychology of midlife, like the task here is actually the second round of individuation, the first being, during the teenage years, but and that's from the primary caregivers, but this is like Carl Jung. And the
Mm,
second, wave of that happens in midlife where the individuation challenge is to separate from cultures and societal like and cultural conditioning and wearing all of those different masks. And it's like, okay, shedding those, then who are you? And it's such a vulnerable and hard time to walk away from what has felt safe and familiar and secure to, explore this like seductive mystery of like, what else is there? Or who else could I be? Or what paths didn't I take? I mean, that's a question I hear a lot from clients is like, they're fantasizing about the paths not taken and like what would have happened if I had gone this route. And um, doesn't mean, you have to blow up your whole life and separate from all of those things at once and like change everything and do it over. My story kind of ended up that way in a very slow, slow emergent process over this last decade. But yeah, I think that like once we have the, marriages, kids, mortgages, taking care of elders, like all of those responsibilities of midlife, it's like very hard to like rock that boat because those ripples ripple out in ways that do impact other people, which does come back to your the Glennon Doyle quote of like there's no such thing as one way liberation. It's like and rocking that boat and those people and those systems actually does everyone a favor. Like if you're just standing in your truth and in your honesty, it's like allowing them to do the same and to, you know, pursue other paths that might be more true for them too, even if it hurts at first. And it's so scary
absolutely.
because it feels like you're going to burn bridges or, change really stable relationships. But I feel like doing that with honesty is really the best gift that you can give yourself and the other people.
And I feel like here is where the words we say to ourselves and the words we say out loud matter so much, because when you talk about emergence and revealing your truth and living with integrity or honesty and authenticity, that feels really aligned and alive and juicy and like a
Mm-hmm.
yes, an empowered yes. And then we
Mm-hmm.
say, and then when I think like, oh, and I've said it, I'm going to blow up my life, I'm going to
Yeah.
destroy
Right.
everything, I'm going to break things apart, I'm going to burn bridges, like all this like kind of violent terminology. I feel
Right.
terrible about my choices. And so sometimes when a client will say, what am I going to blow up my life for this? I'm like, okay, well, what if we say that differently? And how does
Yeah.
that feel in your body? Right.
Right.
And it's amazing how that shift happens. I was just working with a couple who said, they're the end of their marriage is a failure. And I said,
Mm.
what if we said complete instead of failure? What if every time you say failure, you say complete? And they started
Mm.
crying. They're like, that feels better. Like that,
Mm.
it's
I love that reframe.
it's the same, the result is the same. They're going to separate, but,
Yeah.
but it's not because it was a failure, you know?
No, yeah, it's just like, I don't know, Craig, my ex said to me, like, yeah, you know, we still love each other, but it's time to do something different. It's just like that part is complete. And then we're going to do
Yeah,
something different now. And we'll still be connected through it in our case and
exactly.
just not married. And yeah, it doesn't have to be this like huge explosion necessarily.
Exactly.
And I know, you know, my situation in divorce is different than some people's will be, but or would be or have been. But I do feel like, yeah, like what you're talking about with like the violent sort of metaphor, like I use volcanic sort of metaphors in my book a lot. Like there was like a quaking inside and then this magma needed to come, whatever. But it ends with the idea of, I think this is like the last line of my book, about some of the most fertile land is built on
Mm.
volcanic ash or volcanic ground. Like that's, and
Mm.
I try to keep that vision in my head of like islands where it's
Mhm.
just like flourishing, like lush, green, verdant, new growth coming out of something like that. It's like this just had to come up and out and to have that
Yes.
growth happen. So
And
it just
I
keeps,
love,
you know, becoming more and more becoming like it's a process that isn't
I love
over
that.
when the volcano explodes necessarily.
I love that image of fertile ground, and that the most fertile ground is in that place of curiosity and expansion. And I don't know, and
Yeah,
who knows, right? What will
who
happen?
knows?
And so you, I'm sure beautifully, you work with individuals and groups, but you're
Mhm.
really leaning into groups and circling up. So I want to hear about what you are doing, what you're offering.
Sure. Yeah. So I do offer one-to-one, excuse me. I offer one-to-one midlife coaching for people all over the world because I do it over Zoom. Excuse
Yeah,
me, I
yeah.
need
Oh,
water.
let's both do it. Let's drink. Drink
Mhm.
water, everybody. Have a sip.
Sorry. Um, and I am offering a midlife emergence group guidance program this fall. So it'll be mid-September to early December 2023. And enrollment is open through September 10th of 2023. And then we're going to start on September 18th. And that is kind of a group version of the individual coaching I do in a way where it's like around coming together with other women and non-binary folks who get it, who get this time of life, who are going through it, and um, really holding each other in the messy transformation that it can be. And I am so in love with the process of doing this in a circle, just the
Yes.
ancient art of circling, of you know, I'm thinking about Bill Plotkin's like soulcraft work around, I mean, that's not the origin, but where I learned the concept of counsel, which is like
Mm.
how, you know, coming together and one person, you know, having the talking piece and speaking and being witnessed, you know, talking with, you know, from the heart, and everyone listening and witnessing from the heart, and reflection happening, not necessarily advice giving or any of the ways that we might do in like a small talk conversation, but like just even repeating back, like, I heard you say the word free, or, you know, something where it's like, oh,
Mm.
feeling seen and heard, and
Mm.
hearing each person's truth spoken out in the light really does not allow shame to exist in that space, because it's like hearing that might spark something in someone else that they needed to hear that day and brings forward something in them. And I've just watched the alchemy of this process repeatedly when I've run these groups, and it is so powerful. Obviously, one-on-one coaching is powerful too, because it's a very individual and personal connection. And in the groups, it's just a different sort of energy where it's like this, it takes on this other life, and just feels, yeah, I'm always coming away from those with such awe of the women in the circle and how much growth and expansion can happen. So I'm super psyched to be running that again this fall, and yeah, and just support that process to how I can. So
Yeah.
that's happening right now as well, and well, it'll be happening soon. The enrollment's happening now. And yeah, so one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and then
Nice.
I do individual, I mean, I do visual art. So you know, I'm an artist. I did the cover of my book, and I
Wow.
have an Etsy shop where I sell like oracle decks, and I do commissioned art pieces on there. And yeah, just blending all of the different kind of passions that I have into different ways of offering.
Beautiful. When you speak of groups,
And
I work with individuals and groups as well. And interestingly
mhm,
enough, usually I'm circling up a group of neurodivergent or neuroqueer people, and I just
yeah,
love it. I sometimes just sit back and just like you all, like almost they don't need me. It's the beauty and the
right.
power is in the group dynamic. But then what's fascinating me and really lighting me up is that even when I go to speak in corporations, where in the
Hmm.
beginning of the call, everyone is fully masked and armored up and in their buttoned up shirts, literally and figuratively.
Right.
And then I start to lead with vulnerability and start to create that safer, hopefully space where some disclosing and sharing can happen. And the transformation, even in a corporate space, of a group from beginning to end, it's just this. I think of it like an electricity, like circling back to the
Hmm.
electricity of things. Uh,
Everything. Yeah.
like yeah, of everything, the electricity of everything, like the electricity and energy in the room once people start sharing,
Yes.
uh, is it just lights me up like nothing else. So when you speak of it, I share that with you, and I think there's so much beauty and, like you said, ancient,
Yeah.
beauty in this form. And so often when I'm talking to my clients, I'm like, I would love to work with you one on one. I'm like, but have you considered groups? Because it's like
Right.
when they talk about loneliness and
Right.
shame and fear and limiting beliefs, I'm just like, oh my goodness. And then their first response is always like, nah, I don't do well with groups. I don't fit in groups. Nobody will like
Hmm.
me. I won't like anybody else. So I'll often just say, come to one, just come to one co-working session. And
Yes.
then they're like, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. And just like,
Right.
love that. I love it so
I
much.
know. I have this quote framed by my back door. I see it every time I come in and out of my house, and it says, it's by a company called, or an artist, but her company is called People I Loved. And it says, all of the things that make us feel alone are actually what connect us, or something like that. And
Oh,
I
I
always think
love
about that energy with, I might have butchered the quote, I hope I didn't, but I do read it every day. So sadly, I can't recount it in this moment,
that's
but it
hilarious.
is something like that. And I think about it with, like, with the group stuff, I think, and just with my own things, the things that we think we're most alone in and hold the most shame around, um, are really where we find the
Yes.
deepest connection. It's like we really drop the mask and the bullshit and like go deep in there, and it's like finding that place where, the shame really can't live because we're speaking it in the light. And yeah, it also, yeah, it reminds me of, I have a quote by my desk, over here, and it was by me the whole time I wrote my book: the story you're ashamed to tell is the one that will set you free. And I feel like that,
Ooh.
that's Lizzie Rusinko. Yeah, and I feel like that when I'm, yeah, when I'm writing, when I'm offering that, and I feel like that for every person who's in that group setting, it's like there's a freedom, there's like a, you can see the unbuttoning, like you said, and just the release and the relief of, being more visible in that vulnerability together,
Mm.
because you're all
Yeah.
doing that together. um
Yeah. Oh my
yeah, I love
goodness.
it.
So many, my brain is like, I don't know if it's called spider webbing, but just like going into all these different directions of things that
Me
I
too.
could talk to you about. And then I just want to go like write a book right now and do a podcast and make a post and write some content, which is
Totally.
always a sign of a fun, dynamic conversation. But alas, because my audience is also neurodivergent, they're like, yeah, 30 minutes is good, Basha. So
Yep.
I will complete this conversation. And what is the best, whether it's social media platform or website, where do you suggest people go to find you easily?
You can find everything, book, courses, all of it on my website, which is just my name, jenberlingo.com. And I hang out on Instagram the most as far as social media, and that's just my name as well, at Jen Berlingo. It's JenBerlingo. It's like Berlin and then go.
And I started
um,
singing bingo when you said the INGO. I almost sang
right?
it in my head. I love it. I love
That's
it.
so funny. My ex-husband was like, I always wanted my nickname to be Bingo, but it never caught on, like when he was a teenager, and no one's called him
Bingo Berlingo.
that. But yeah.
That's fun. That's fun. Well, I will certainly obviously put all those things in the show notes as well. But what a pleasure and joy to finally meet you, Jen, and learn more
Yeah,
about
so great to
your
meet you
work.
too. And thank you. Thank you for talking with me too about the neurodivergent piece. I haven't like I said, I'm at the beginning of my exploration around it, and hearing you talk about the highly sensitive person piece and
Mhm.
the ableism in that is, yeah,
Mhm.
just enlightening and makes a ton of sense. And I'm just so curious to learn more. So I really appreciate that, and just talking with you and the work that you do in the world. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, everybody, I'm hoping that this episode is one that you enjoyed so much that you're willing to share with a friend or a loved one. Of course, it would also thrill me if you rated and reviewed and subscribed, and you know what to do. It really helps. It helps us spread the word. It helps us get our message out there. But mostly, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it touched your heart. So. Thank you, everybody, for listening or watching wherever you are in the world. And thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.